Welcome to this deep dive, where we take a closer look at the stories shaping our world. Today, we're focusing on a significant development. Attorney General Pamela Bondi's decision to seek the death penalty for Luigi Mangione.
Yeah, this is a really multifaceted situation, and that decision by the Attorney General definitely adds another layer of complexity for you to consider.
Absolutely. Just to, bring everyone up to speed, Luigi Mangione is the man accused of the murder of Brian Thompson back on December 4th, 2024.
Right. And it's worth remembering who Brian Thompson was, the CEO of UnitedHealthcare, a major player in the healthcare industry. He was also described, I think, quite pointedly as an innocent man and father of 2 young children. That detail really underscores the personal tragedy here.
It does. So to really understand what's going on, we've looked at, a range of sources. We've got the official DOJ press release, news reports from outlets like Politico, PBS, CBS, the Associated Press, Al Jazeera, and even transcripts from YouTube reports, Washington Post, AP, the Indian Express.
Quite a mix.
Yeah. Our goal with this deep dive is really to move beyond just the headlines and get to the key facts surrounding this decision, the context, why now, and the different viewpoints that are starting to emerge.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Sounds good. Where should we start?
Let's start with the alleged crime itself. Can you remind us of the specifics? When and where did this actually happen?
Okay, so the alleged murder took place on December 4th, 2024. It was outside a hotel in midtown Manhattan. UnitedHealthcare was actually about to hold an investor conference there.
Right. And the details that have come out about the attack itself are quite striking, aren't they?
They really are. Thompson was allegedly shot from behind. The gunman was masked. But what's particularly significant, I think, is the evidence authorities reported finding at the scene.
The ammunition.
Exactly. Ammunition that had the words delay, deny, and depose actually written on it.
Wow. Those words, they immediately bring to mind the common criticisms you hear leveled against insurance companies, their tactics. That really suggests a potential motive, doesn't it? It certainly does, and investigators have definitely highlighted that. Plus, they've pointed to writings and a notebook, which some have called a manifesto, supposedly belonging to Mangione. And this material reportedly expresses, really strong hostility towards the health insurance industry and wealthy executives specifically.
So this isn't being framed as just some random act of violence, then?
Not at all. They've mentioned specific entries, apparently from August and October of 2024. Things like the target is insurance and an expressed intent to whack an insurance company's CEO.
Whack. That definitely points towards pre-planning a specific target.
It certainly suggests that, yeah.
Though it's interesting, UnitedHealthcare has stated publicly that Mangione was never actually one of their clients.
That is interesting. It's a really crucial piece of information, actually. It kind of complicates a simple narrative of personal grievance against that specific company.
Right. So after the shooting, there was that 5-day manhunt.
Yes, that's right. A pretty intense search that ended with his arrest in Altoona, Pennsylvania.
And when they arrested him?
At that time, he was reportedly found with a handgun, one that matched the description of the murder weapon, and also that notebook we were just talking about.
Okay. Now, let's shift to the legal side. What specific charges is Mangione actually facing right now?
Well, he's facing charges at both the federal and the state level. So federally, the big one is murder through the use of a firearm. And that's the charge that carries the possibility of the death penalty.
Okay.
Plus, there are federal charges for stalking and other firearms offenses, though the full federal indictment, that hasn't been unsealed yet.
And what about the state charges, the ones in New York?
In New York State, he's looking at 11 counts. That includes first-degree murder and also terrorism charges. If convicted there, the max sentence is life in prison without parole.
And we know his plea for the state charges, right?
Yes, he's pleaded not guilty to all 11 state charges, but he hasn't yet been arraigned on those federal charges, so no plea there yet.
Okay, so that sets the stage. Crime details, initial charges. Now we get to the core of today's deep dive. Attorney General Bondi's decision to pursue the death penalty. When exactly did she announce this?
That announcement came on Tuesday, April 1st, 2025.
And the reasoning? What did she say was behind this move?
Well, in her public statement, Bondi called the murder a premeditated, cold-blooded assassination. She also characterized it as an act of political violence that, quote, shocked America.
Strong words.
Very. And she explicitly linked her decision to President Trump's agenda, specifically mentioning his goals to stop violent crime and make America safe again.
She also referenced a specific memo, didn't she? Something from day one.
Yes, exactly. Her day one memo, which was titled Reviving the Federal Death Penalty and Lifting the Moratorium on Federal Executions. That title alone pretty clearly signals the policy direction.
No ambiguity there.
None. And following that memo, she formally directed the acting U.S. Attorney, Matthew Podolsky, to seek the death penalty in Mangione's case.
So this decision isn't happening in a vacuum. It's clearly tied to broader policy shifts on capital punishment at the federal level. Let's talk about that wider context for a second. What's President Trump's overall stance been?
Well, President Trump has consistently been a very outspoken proponent of expanding capital punishment. If you remember, during his first term, his administration carried out 13 federal executions.
Which was a significant number compared to previous years.
Absolutely, a notable increase. And importantly, on his very first day back in office this term, he signed an executive order. That order specifically compels the DOJ to seek the death penalty in federal cases where it's legally applicable.
So basically setting a strong directive from the top.
Exactly. And what was the situation right before he came back?
Well, the last federal execution was back in 2021. Then President Biden came in and put a moratorium on them during his term.
Right. So AG Bondi's order to seek death for Mangione comes right after she formally lifted that Biden-era moratorium.
A direct reversal of policy.
Precisely. It's also worth remembering that in his final weeks, President Biden commuted the sentences of most people on federal death row.
Right. I remember reading about that. How many were left?
He commuted 37 out of 40 sentences. So only 3 individuals remained on federal death row after that action.
And who are they, just for context?
The 3 remaining are Dylan Roof, convicted for the Charleston church shooting, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev from the Boston Marathon bombing, and Robert Bowers, who committed the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting.
Okay. So we've got the decision, the policy backdrop. Now let's look at the reactions. How did Mangione's defense attorney respond to this?
His attorney, Karen Friedman and Giselo, came out very strongly against it. She called the Justice Department's move barbaric and said it was politically motivated.
Politically motivated? How so?
She argued it went against the recommendation of the local federal prosecutors working on the case and also against historical precedent in these kinds of situations.
She used some pretty vivid language, too, didn't she?
She did. She accused warring jurisdictions, presumably meaning the state versus federal approaches, of turning Mangione into a, quote, human ping-pong ball.
Wow. So basically arguing it's an overreach driven by politics.
That seems to be the core of her argument, yes. That it's less about the case specifics and more about the broader political climate and the push to use the federal death penalty.
What about legal experts? Anyone else weighing in?
Yeah, constitutional law professor Eric Friedman also criticized the decision. He raised a couple of key points. One, he noted that historically, federal death sentences imposed in New York haven't actually stood up on appeal since 1988.
None since 1988. That's significant.
It is. And he also pointed to the usual process within the DOJ, where there is supposed to be consistent criteria applied when deciding whether or not to seek the death penalty. The idea is to avoid arbitrary or politically driven decisions.
So he's suggesting this might be a departure from those norms.
That seems to be the implication, yeah. That perhaps this decision wasn't made based solely on those established, consistent criteria.
Now, shifting gears a bit, this case has also stirred up some, well, unexpected public reactions, especially from people critical of the healthcare industry.
It's a really fascinating angle, isn't it? You've got some people, some groups who are obviously very frustrated with health insurance, coverage denials, costs.
Right.
And they've kind of rallied around Mangione. He's become almost an internet sensation, apparently. His face on merch, memes, a Free Luigi movement.
It's quite striking. Amidst a murder charge, this level of support or at least identification with his perceived grievance, it really suggests a deep vein of anger towards the system.
It really does. It highlights that frustration some people feel toward the health insurance industry. It's definitely not the typical public response you see in a murder case.
Definitely not. On the flip side, what about the corporate world, especially health insurers? How have they reacted?
Well, reports indicate that Thompson's killing definitely alarmed the business community. There were even suggestions that some health insurers were considering things like switching more to remote work or holding meetings online.
As a security measure for executives.
Exactly. It seems to underscore a sense of vulnerability, maybe? And shows how an event like this can potentially impact corporate operations and safety protocols.
Yeah, understandable. Okay, let's get into the procedural stuff. We know Mangione pleaded not guilty to the state charges. What's the likely timeline now, especially with the federal death penalty decision?
Well, as we said, he hasn't been arraigned federally yet.
Hmm.
Initially, prosecutors indicated the state case might go first, running parallel to the federal one.
But Bondi's announcement might change that.
It's unclear. It could potentially shift the priority towards the federal trial, especially given the severity of the penalty being sought. We'll have to see how that plays out.
And the defense team is preparing, obviously.
Oh, absolutely. They've brought on an attorney who specifically specializes in death penalty cases. That signals they are definitely gearing up for a major fight on the federal front.
Makes sense. There was also that recent request Mangione made, something about a laptop.
Ah, yes. He requested a laptop to help review the case documents, which are apparently quite extensive.
But the DA's office opposed it.
They did. The Manhattan DA's office argued he already has computer access at the detention center in Brooklyn, where he's being held.
Okay.
They also suggested he'd already gotten some special treatment, like being allowed civilian clothes for court. And there's that slightly odd detail mentioned about heart-shaped notes allegedly being passed from a supporter via his attorneys.
Right. Definitely a case with some unusual elements popping up.
It certainly is. And the legal path forward looks pretty intricate, with both state and federal charges, and now this huge factor of the federal death penalty hanging over it all.
Okay, let's try to wrap this deep dive up by summarizing the key takeaways from our discussion today.
Right. So, the big headline. Attorney General Bondi has directed federal prosecutors to seek the death penalty for Luigi Mangione, accused of murdering UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson.
And this isn't in isolation.
No, definitely not. It aligns with President Trump's renewed push for federal capital punishment and comes right after Bondi lifted the moratorium put in place by the Biden administration.
And the decision itself has really stirred the pot.
Absolutely. It sparked major debate. You've got discussions about violent crime, the death penalty itself, its morality, its application, and also tapping into those deep public frustrations about the healthcare industry.
Plus the legal complexity.
Yeah, complex legally with the dual state and federal tracks, and complex publicly with that unexpected support for Mangione from some quarters, contrasting with the alarm in the corporate world.
It's definitely a multi-layered case with broad implications. So for our final thought today, something for you, the listener, to mull over. When you consider all these pieces, the alleged motive that seems tied to political anger, the intense legal fight ahead, the really polarized public reactions, what does this whole situation tell us? What does it reveal about how individual grievances, corporate power, and, well, the ultimate punishment intersect in our society today?
And maybe also, what are the longer-term implications? Especially pursuing the federal death penalty so forcefully in a state, New York, that doesn't even have it on its own books.
Exactly. A lot to think about there. It certainly provides us with a great deal to contemplate.